of the. All right, calling to order today's meeting of the Regional Directors Meeting. Thank you for your patience. The first agenda item is updates from the regional offices on compliance reports, election activity, and outreach reports. I'll first turn to Jessica for the Salinas region.
Good afternoon. The compliance report, in summary, I just submitted a monthly compliance report, but in summary, the Smith packing matter is now closed, and all the terms of that, I'm sorry, maybe I should give you the number. It's 2018 CE 048 SAL, and the decision is 46 ALRB number 3. Respondent Smith Packing has complied with all of the terms. They had to provide us with a list of new hires that they provided the notice to employees for a period of 1 year after the matter was released for compliance. So that's 1 year has completed, and they've completed all the other terms. So as of this month of October, the only pending matter in the region for compliance is Zavala Farms of Salinas LLC, and that's 2021 CE 18 SAL, and the board decision is 49 ALRB number 1. And there's no election activity to report on in the Salinas region. And in regards to outreach activity, I'm happy to report that we are now underway with conducting various types of outreach in the 3 offices that are part of the Salinas region, the Santa Rosa office, the Salinas, and the Oxnard office. And one of those activities that all 3 offices participating in is radio programs, at least once a month, in some cases every other month. And so recently, I spoke on Radio Indígena, which is a Oxnard based Spanish language and Mixteco language radio program. I also spoke on Radio Bilingüe, has a La Hora Triqui, which is for the Monterey County, Salinas area. And we've been participating, staff has been participating in KBBF, which is a radio station up in Santa Rosa. And so some of the things that we talk about in addition to the ALRA are examples of recent successes from cases, and the hosts seem to want us to speak more about settlements and other examples that we can provide. And so there's been some questions that have been posed to us on the radio programs as well, and we're working with staff to share information on responding to those questions. We also participated in the Mexican Consulate Labor Rights Week, and recently we've had some Farm Worker Appreciation Day events that we participated in. Oxnard was the most recent one. Sebastian Sanchez was there from the labor agency, as well as various service providers and the Department of Labor in Ventura County. We've also been providing information in a more dialogue format to a couple of different organizations, staff members, for example, with CBDIO. We've recently set a meeting time so that we can talk with their labor staff in particular about the ALRA and answer their questions. So a little bit different than when we do presentations to their members, for example, farm workers who come to them for services. We've also now started to sit down with some of their staff members who have more specific and particular questions they want us to answer about the act. And I think I found that really useful because it's a way for us to almost multiply some of the folks who are out talking about the ALRA, and for them to be able to have the information, they feel they have the capacity to some degree to know about the ALRA, so that when farm workers ask them questions, they can answer it a little bit more specifically, and then of course refer those workers over to us. So those are recent developments. We did one for MyCop, and we have a meeting scheduled at CBDIO, which is the Centro Binacional de Desarrollo Indígena in Monterey County. And I think that concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Thank you for all that great work. Happy to hear it. And if there's any video or audio clips from any of our presentations that you think we could use on our social media, on our website. We're collecting those, so definitely talk to Daniela.
Can I make one more, because you reminded me of something. Federico Nieto, one of our field examiners in Salinas, went out during the Mexican Consulate Labor Rights Week. We were invited to go out to a field with members of the Mexican Consulate's office, and he went out and they were talking to a crew, and it was a farm labor contractor, and he had his crew stop and listen to the Mexican Consulate talk about Labor Rights Week, and then asked Federico to share also about the ALRB, and he did that. He did a great job, and there is a Facebook Live video that we can send over of his short presentation in the field.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. All right, turning over to our acting Visalia Regional Director, Yesenia De Luna.
Good afternoon. So I'll start with the compliance. I also submitted the report on Friday, September the 29th. Just a couple highlights on here. In the Garawan case, 44 ALRB number 1, we have begun the calculation of the make-whole according to the recent court order and decision. Let's see, the Benjamin Wrights 2018 CE 002 Visalia. We need to complete the supervisor training this month, and then also the posting will be up, and then that will conclude that case or that compliance matter. Those are the highlights on the compliance. We do have an election. A majority support petition was filed in the Visalia office on September 13th. It's for DMB Packing Corporation doing business as the DeMare Company. Case number 2023 RM001 Visalia. We submitted, we did the count and submitted, the results on September 19th. So right now we're still in the 30-day period for the United Farm Workers of America to, they have those 30 days to try and either get more votes or fix the cards that there may be issues with. Moving on to outreach. So we participated the Labor Week through the Mexican Consulate, San Diego, El Centro, Fresno, and Madera, and here in Sacramento too. Then we've been doing trainings with local organizations. I actually, the last Friday we did CC, let me get their name for you. I can come back to that one, but so last weekend, the past 3 Sundays, this Sunday and the past 2, we participated in the Guelaguetzas, which is it comes from, I guess, Oaxaca, the state of Oaxaca. So we've been to Lamont, which is south of Bakersfield. We did Madera last Sunday, and this coming Sunday, this coming Sunday is Madera. The other one was in Fresno last Sunday. We are also okay, thank you. Yes, the Central California Environmental Network. So they have a group
justice network.
Yeah, environmental justice. They have last Friday we did a training with their staff, and then this Friday I actually will be doing a training with their ambassadors. So these are actual farm workers or that are on the ground and can spread the word to other farm workers. So that's happening this Friday in the evening, which are, available time for them. I think it's from like 7:30 to 8:30 or something like that. Or 7 to 8:30. So I will be doing that with Lucia. Last Sunday also, Lucia traveled to the Tula Lake area, which is basically up in the Oregon border, which is really great. We're now, hitting those or getting out into this northern part of the state, which is a goal of ours.
Great, thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? What? Oh, it's our court reporter.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that report and appreciate all the work and people traveling the great distances. Our next agenda item, I'm really pleased to share, we're gonna have a brief informational panel discussing outreach to the Punjabi farm worker community. This is a community that I think we've been wanting to have more focus and attention on and learn how we can better engage them. So I'm really excited about our guests today who are gonna help educate us. Our first presenter is Dr. Anavir Singh, who is with the UCSF Fresno Emergency Medicine Residency Program and was recently, I believe, the lead author on a publication, COVID-19 Education and Resource Development for Punjabi-speaking Sikh farm workers in California. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Singh.
Hi everyone, my name is Anuvir. I go by Anu, like a new person, if that helps you pronounce my name a little better. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be sharing my screen and briefly going over my study results regarding Punjabi-speaking farm workers in California. Is everyone able to see my shared screen?
We can see it in here.
Awesome. Let's try to. Know why it's not letting me do the presenter view, but that's okay. So my study title was COVID-19 Education and Farm Worker and Resource Development for Punjabi-Speaking Farm Workers in California. And I am currently a resident physician at UCSF Fresno Emergency Medicine Department. By training, I went to UCSF for med school, and I did my master's in public health at UC Berkeley, which is when I did this study in collaboration with the Western Center for Agriculture, Health, and Safety at UC Davis. The brief table of contents for this presentation, I'll be briefly going over the background of the study, public health significance, research, objectives, methods, results, and conclusion, and following up with the questions at the end. So background, I'm sure many of you know this. According to the 2013-2014 National Agriculture Workers Survey data, 73% of all agriculture workers are foreign-born. Most of these individuals were born in Mexico, about 4% in Central America, and about 1% in other countries, including India and other Asian countries as well. So when I was there were no COVID-19 resources that were developed specifically for Punjabi-speaking farm workers, which was my interest. My father is a farm worker, and a lot of her family friends are farm workers. So that's where I drew a lot of my inspiration for this study. And I worked with the Western Center for Agriculture, Health, and Safety, who had developed extensive resources for Spanish-speaking farm workers in Spanish and as well English. So I kind of used their resources and adapted them to Punjabi speaking farm workers to reach kind of like a wider audience. In terms of public health significance, I just wanted to mainly address the health inequities, especially for farm workers through my study, making sure that farm workers were getting culturally competent, linguistically appropriate, and farm industry specific COVID-19 resources during the peak COVID times in 2019 and 2020. And subsequently, the main goal was to improve understanding of COVID among farm working populations and subsequently lower the transmission risk for farm workers as well as the population in general as a whole. So our goal was to provide culturally competent, linguistically appropriate agricultural industry-specific resources, mainly to Punjabi-speaking farm workers in California. And these were our objectives, basically understanding the current needs of Punjabi-speaking farm workers, assessing whether the current COVID-19 resources were meeting those needs, and subsequently developing these resources based on their needs and disseminating them through collaboration with community organizations and ag industry representatives. So methods is a two-phase qualitative study that we conducted. In phase one, I conducted 4 to 5 key informant interviews in Fresno and Yolo County. These were semi-structured interviews. I used an interview guide for them. And I asked open-ended questions to address the current needs of current COVID-19 educational resource needs for this population. And then I developed resources based on those findings. And then I conducted in phase two 3 focus group discussions with 5 participants in each group to kind of discuss whether the newly developed resources actually what they wanted and whether they were meeting their needs at that time. So this is just an example of the interview guide that I used. It's kind of like had key themes for farm workers, basically asking them how do they normally educate themselves? Are they interested in getting more information? And what would they find helpful in terms of like handouts, books, photo novels, videos, posters, etc. And then the second theme was basically asking them regarding platforms that they use to obtain their information. And then thirdly, key themes regarding print materials, like what is the size preference for them? What images would they want on them? How much text? Because when I was doing the background research, I didn't really see any sort of work done that addressed the needs of Punjabi speakers in terms of like resource preference. And lastly, key themes regarding radio and video examples, whether people would prefer radio or video messages over print materials. So these are the resources that I use that were currently published through various organizations, including the Western Center for Agriculture, Health, and Safety. And then I kind of reused them to address in the first phase of my study to see whether these resources, if they were in, would meet the needs of Punjabi-speaking farm workers. Here's another example of just the resources that I used in phase one of my study. And then here are some more. Use the California Strawberry Commission's resource on the left that was more sort of tailored towards the agriculture equipment that workers use at work. And on the right side, it's just a foldable card that was shared by the Western Center for Agriculture, Health, and Safety for use. So based on those, based on the key informant interviews, so going over the themes, key themes for farm workers. So I found that mostly COVID-19 knowledge was obtained through from television, physician or family members, and not through employers, which was not shocking to me as I was doing most of the teaching for my father and how to stay safe for him at work when there were no PPE provided to him or there was a lack of PPE at work and they were traveling in large numbers, carpooling to and from work. There was a unanimous interest in receiving COVID-19 education and safety information. One participant actually mentioned, anyone can provide us information, it is good for us and our health. It is important for us to stay healthy. And they preferred handouts, posters, and videos over workbooks and photo novels, which were contrary to some of the research done with Spanish-speaking farm workers that had a pretty big interest in using photo novels as a source of information. Nextly, key themes regarding platforms. There was a heavy reliance upon the printed materials. Also for in terms of what they wanted on printed materials. There's a heavy preference for a regular paper size 8.5 by 11-inch handout size, and they preferred culturally relevant photographs. Someone mentioned if the pictures can show someone of Punjabi background wearing a turban, that would be good. I do not like cartoons in printed materials. And they had high preference for limited text, and they recommended using colorful figures and colorful text to just like convey the messages. Lastly, in terms of videos and radios, radio safety messages were unanimously found useful. Most of the farm workers mentioned that they use radios at home, and while they traveled to and from work, that was kind of like their main source of information. So there was a big preference for radio safety messages. Also, in terms of video preferences, they preferred live action video illustrations, like I mentioned earlier too. They did not like cartoon illustrations, and they had a preference for short videos about 1 to 3 minutes long, and characters that represent the Punjabi community. Teaching them were something that they found relatable and more helpful. So based on those findings in my phase 1 of the study, I created these resources, kind of using the information that I learned, using real pictures, using colorful text, and also kind of like limiting the text. So I got these resources were published by CDC. I kind of just translated them into Punjabi and used the pictures that I took while I was working with these farm workers. So the first one, the resource on the left is how to basically stay safe at work, social distancing, how to go to and from work safely, putting the windows down if they're traveling in large numbers, and then how to use bathrooms appropriately at work, and having importance of clean hygiene and hand washing at work. And then this was the other one. I had shared this resource with them. They really found it helpful through the California Strawberry Commission. So I kind of just translated the text into Punjabi, and it sat well with most of the participants. It was really applicable to them. It was the equipment that the pictures that were shown were basically all the equipment that they were using at work, and they found it really to use these resources. And the one on the right is kind of, again, going over brief messages, like the one on the right says, wash your hands, make sure you are maintaining physical distancing while eating or staying close to each other. And then lastly, making sure they're wearing masks at work. It's just kind of like using what I learned, like limited text, real pictures, and just like brief messages to convey the messages across for these farm workers. And this was a video that I created in collaboration with WHACS, Western Health Center for Agriculture, Health and Safety. I don't know if the audio will play, but it is on YouTube as well that I can share the link for later. It was like a 1 to 2 minute video on COVID-19 vaccination. And this is also, I also recorded radio messages for them and then played these at my subsequent phase 2 of the study to see whether these messages would have been helpful for them if they got these messages early on during the COVID-19 pandemic. These were also brief messages between 40 seconds to a minute long each. So after all the resource creation, I did focus group discussions with the farm workers in Fresno and Yolo counties. So basically, focus group results for print materials, overwhelmingly positive response for newly developed resources. All the focus group participants agreed that the colorful printed materials in Punjabi met their educational needs. The resources were clear with a good balance of text and photographs. There was also unanimous agreement on having a bigger font, which is what I shared on some of my text messages, and using actual pictures, which is what I shared on the resources that I created. They did have one recommendation. Some of the heavy text resources, they recommended including a summary statement or key points of every handout. In terms of videos, again, unanimously found useful. Participants mentioned they were easy to follow and concise. It had a person with a turban sharing the information with us. We are more inclined to listen to such messages. One challenge with videos that participants reported that some of them did not have smartphones or they did not know how to access the videos, because you actually have to type in English to access these videos on a smartphone or other electronic device. They had mentioned, I like the videos, but I have difficulty using them, so I prefer to hear messages on the radio. A possible solution we thought could be just sharing a QR code. Most folks knew how to use a camera, just like making a QR code, publishing it at Punjabi grocery stores or gurdwaras, Sikh temples, to make sure that folks can easily access it and easily utilize the resources without having to type in and search for the videos. The next focus group results for radio messages. Again, there was a very positive response for most of these messages. These were some of the quotes by participants. We would like to hear such messages on the radio. I keep my radio on all the time in my car and at home. If this information was shared before this, referring to coronavirus, wouldn't even spread. We didn't really know before. And then lastly, these messages make you become more aware of your surroundings and take necessary precautions. Other key findings that we weren't hoping to address, but kind of as a byproduct of the study across, some participants shared frustration with putting masks over their turbans. A lot of the masks that were provided to them were those string masks that had to go over the ears, and some of those are not conducive to individuals who wear turbans. So they suggested if retail stores, government, or employees had masks that had strings that they could tie over their turbans, they would be inclined to use those masks because they're more conducive to individuals who are wearing the turban. So overall, our study recommendations kind of like address the preferences of Punjabi-speaking farm workers, which had not been addressed in the past, and wanted to share that print materials, audio messages, and video resources should be taken into consideration when creating future resources for this community. Also, Punjabi farm workers desire more health and safety resources that are tailored to their community in their language. And lastly, most of the research that I did with Punjabi-speaking farm workers that were men, it was really difficult for me to locate or find out farm workers who identified as females or women. So next steps would be expanding the research to make it more generalizable, including women workers, to allow for more complete understanding of resources that are needed by Punjabi-speaking farm workers. In conclusion, the current COVID-19 resources were not meeting the needs of Punjabi-speaking agriculture workers, and there is a need for educational safety and materials that are culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate in 3 different formats: handouts, videos, and radio messages. I think this study does not limit to just COVID-19 education only. I feel like these findings can be applicable to other catastrophes and other health measures as well, including heat-related illnesses. I think we can kind of share similar information with this community using these findings and creating resources that kind of target the handouts, videos, and radio messages, as these were the preferred modes of education attainment for these individuals. That's all I have for today. It's like briefly wanted to go over the study. I thank you all for listening and providing me space to share my findings. Hopefully this is something that we can work on, continue to work on moving forward. And in the end, I'd like to thank my mentor, Pinkerton, and Heather Ryden at Western Center for Agriculture, Health and Safety, my UC Berkeley School of Public Health mentor, Dr. Karen Sokol Gutierrez, and lastly, all the Punjabi-speaking agriculture workers that I had the pleasure to interact with during my project, especially my father, who was a big help and a big resource and big support for this project. Yep, that is all I have, and I am willing to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation, and I think, I don't know if you could see this, but a lot of us were kind of scrambling down notes, because we're working on a big effort across our agency to update materials and find better ways to communicate important information with all farm workers. And so I think this study gives us a lot of ideas and resources and tips. So I really appreciate your work in this area and agree with your comments at the end that I think a lot of this could be applicable for other topics beyond COVID-19. You mentioned heat illness, for example. I'm wondering if you have a sense of other either labor and employment or occupational health and safety issues that you think the Punjabi farm worker community, we should be what messages or educational areas should we be prioritizing? Do you have a sense of that?
I think health-related illnesses definitely a big issue, especially because most farm workers work have long hours during the harvest season, July till September. Other things, of course, like during winter times, just like not just COVID, but other viral illnesses as well that can be spread by being in close proximity to each other, and they're traveling in large numbers on their harvesting. So just like preventable diseases and communicable diseases that we can tailor. And lastly, I think it's important to share the importance of preventative health and making sure that they are seeing their doctors regularly, because most of these folks, I'm an emergency medicine physician, so it breaks my heart when I see like a farm worker come into the ED. Basically, they've been working on, tiring muscles, and they have lots of chronic musculoskeletal issues that they never seek help for. Now, sudden they're unable to move, and then they come into the ED for assistance. I think at that time it's really hard, to offer all the resources that we can offer them early on. So just like making educational resources regarding importance of preventative health. Importance of adequate hydration at work to prevent chronic kidney disease, all those sorts of things. I feel like the scope is huge. We can just began to scratch the surface with COVID-19, and it just happened that I was doing my research and I saw my dad without PPE and traveling in large numbers, which was alarming for me as a medical provider. And that was sort of like the main inspiration for my project to kind of tailor my educational interests and help that community.
Thank you. Another question I had, several of us here participated on administration-wide focus groups, if you will, that talked about misinformation campaigns that targeted specific groups, particularly African-American groups and Latinx groups. And I'm wondering if there was any particular misinformation that targeted Punjabi, the Punjabi demographic, and if there was any particular cultural resistance. I thought what you mentioned about the mask not really working well with the turban, that was helpful for me. But I'm just wondering if you can share any other insights.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in the Punjabi community, WhatsApp is definitely the culprit for most of the misinformation. A lot of the messages get forwarded to a bunch of people, and without any sort of like credible resource, and they just see this image with like a random text like vaccine. Either a lot of folks had fear of vaccines causing more harm, or the vaccines will make you ill. But kind of understanding their fears and appropriately addressing them is important, rather than just like dismissing them. Oh, this is fake news. I think like for me, when I was doing focus group discussions, a lot of the folks said like, oh, but the vaccines will make you sick, or you'll mount a fever after. But educating them, like that's your body's immune system kind of working, so you don't have a subsequent larger infection. It's just like your body is making antibodies for the future to help you become less sick and become non-hospitalized in the future. So I think addressing those is helpful, but I feel like a lot of the initial fear was regarding like vaccines for my community, I guess, like, especially for the older folks. Less so about like wearing a mask. Like I think everyone understood the importance of wearing a mask and hand washing to prevent the spread of COVID-19 initially, but a lot of the hesitation came during like the vaccination campaign when there was a lot of misinformation, especially like political rhetoric at that time too, was not helping either. It was like misinformation regarding how could the vaccines be developed so quickly? Are these even safe? I think just like addressing those fears was important, but yeah.
Interesting. Do any of my colleagues or other staff have questions? Rob?
Well, I just have one question, sort of, I think you mentioned WhatsApp a moment ago, maybe. Is there, when you look, aside from, I know you got the video and the radio is very powerful and the printed materials, did you look at what percentage of like Pujami farm workers have smartphones, and did you look at using any of the social media platforms to
So
be part of that?
I didn't do an analysis on that. It was just an anecdotal experience. Most of the farm workers were not using smartphones, hence the heavy preference for radio messages. However, I wanted to make these resources available in different formats, just so that individuals who use video, who are capable of using smartphones and able to access the videos, they had access for that as well. But I think there was a strong preference if I had to compare video versus radio messages. It was like a heavy reliance on radio messages over video messages, just because of the ease. They can just turn on the radio, and if they're played like every hour for like 30 seconds or so, like 50 messages, I think they would have found that more helpful. In terms of like printed materials, definitely a lot of preference for that. I think what folks had said that most of the times that they pick up these printed materials were either at grocery stores when they go grocery shopping at like Indian grocery markets, and at the gurdwaras, just like temples, or other places like a Sikh parade or other sort of like cultural events that were happening in the community that they had access to. They would be willing to grab those handouts. But if I had to choose one, I think radio messages probably took the cake in terms of like how they wanted information disseminated for them. I did not do analysis on how many individuals were using smartphones, but most of them said that they had difficulty time typing in for video messages, so they would have something that was easily accessible, either like a QR code or like a radio message.
Thank you.
Great. Barry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So how cooperative were the agricultural employers, to your knowledge, in disseminating this information to their employees?
Very good question. I think ALRB was less cooperative during that time than the agricultural employers, because it was when they were tiering the counties by color, and Fresno County was purple for like the whole time. So they would not let me initiate my study despite like all these preventative measures for the longest time, which delayed a lot of my research. But employers are actually very helpful. I think I told them that I wouldn't be sharing, of course, like everything would be confidential. That was like a huge thing for them. Like I didn't share which farm like I went to. I obtained consent from the farm workers, and some of them were seasonal workers, so it was like hard to kind of pinpoint to which farm they were located at. So I think employers are really thankful. Actually, they were more receptive to this education, because they themselves weren't able to provide this education, and they couldn't afford workers missing work per se. So I think it was in their benefit as well to make sure that the workers are healthy and provided adequate health information. That being said, most of the employers that I worked with were Punjabi speaking as well. So I think there's also like an inherent aspect of like helping the community as well through like education. And they kind of some of them took pride in the fact that they were educating their employers through. So.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
With respect to, other typical farm worker health issues like heat illness and pesticide exposures, is the availability of appropriate information getting to Punjabi farm workers?
Sorry, I missed the second half of your question. Are you able to say that again?
Maybe it's because I don't have them.
Yeah,
Sitting.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so with respect to, information regarding heat illness and pesticide exposures, is that information getting to Punjabi farm workers in an appropriate way?
I would say definitely not. I haven't done research on that matter, but this is anecdotal experience of like seeing my father come in, or like his friends were also farm workers come in from work. I think for me, I do most of the teaching for my father, and in terms of like how to stay safe during heat illnesses. I don't think there has been like a single handout in Punjabi that my dad ever brought, whether during COVID or during like wildfires, like how to protect themselves. He was not, I had to arrange N95 masks for him and his
We froze.
Give it just a moment. It looks like we had a freeze. Okay, well, we'll hopefully come back to him in just a second. We do have a second speaker on this panel who's joining us by phone, Navdeep Singh from the Jakara movement. If you want to go off mute. And I invited, the ALRB has worked with the Jakara movement a little bit in the past, and I'm hoping we can expand that collaboration. But I thought, given their work in the Central Valley and with this similar community, it would be great to just hear about their organization generally, and hear about their efforts to work with farm workers and kind of address their various needs. And I think you may still be on mute. I can't tell. Santiago, if you can assist.
I believe
Great.
the line is now unmuted.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay,
Welcome.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And my apologies for not being able to join on video as I was at an airport. So if you hear background noise, please excuse me. My name is Navdeep Singh, as was shared, and the executive director of the Jakara movement. And I really appreciate you all giving me an opportunity to share a few words today. And anytime I get to share space with Anuvir or hear about one of our community partners, CBDIO, it makes it that much better. I think I'm going to make a few remarks in some ways to open a little bit about the organization. And some places I'll probably compliment, and in other places probably take us either in slightly new directions or have actually just sort of other input that sometimes aligns with Dr. Singh's and sometimes may take us in a slightly different direction. So in the Jakara movement, we work in 14 counties throughout California, largely in the Central Valley or the San Joaquin Valley, the Sacramento Valley, and the East Bay, as well as the Inland Empire. And in our work, we have 4 major areas. We have at this point, over 90 high school chapters, 15 collegiate chapters. So we have youth development work. But most relevant here, we have a workers' right and labor right team, as well as a public health team. And it was sort of during COVID-19 where we got to work most directly with Anuvir, Dr. Singh, in a couple of different collaborations. But I guess, a little bit about your sort of Punjabi workforce in California. Punjabi speakers and Hmong speakers still tend to be some of the highest, like largest concentration of Asian language speaking communities in the Central Valley. And the Punjabi farm working community is especially concentrated in Merced County, Fresno County, a bit in Kern County, and then we go up to Sutter, Sacramento, and a little bit into Yolo, especially the Woodland area. Both seasonal workers and those that work sort of in more sort of long-term sort of contracts with some of their employers rather. I think you know, there was a question, for instance, with regards to you know, are they getting adequate information, whether, as Anuvi was sharing about heat exposure or even pesticides, and I would say woefully not. I think one of the biggest things that we hear from even sometimes our high school students or collegiate students is actually concern for their parents. Anecdotally, for those that have worked in farm work for over extended periods of time, I'm only can share with you anecdotes. We're seeing a number of cases of those with Parkinson's, even at an earlier onset age. I'm not suggesting a causation, but there seems to be some sort of correlation in terms of what we're actually seeing and what is bubbling up sort of within the community. We have had very different experiences, to be honest, with some of the employers. I think, and maybe as sort of as Anubu was laying, I think at an earlier point, I think there was more of a synergy between some of the employers and the farm workers. I will definitely say that as time has progressed, I think that relationship has actually become a little bit more fractured, and we have definitely seen less information and a willingness where there was at one time a partnership for employers to provide information. It seems today that they're much less likely to provide anything. Where we've actually seen even major impacts and even a direct sort of desire not to provide anything is with the recent, for instance, USDA $600 sort of grants going to farm workers that may have been affected by COVID. That's happening right now. You know, we provided just free because we're not contracted by any agency, but we wanted Punjabi-speaking farm workers to even be availed of that information. Many employers did not want that information shared at all, and we've seen I think, as you're seeing, a polarization within the country. I think that's very much happening within the relationship between employers and farm workers as well. I think that has been a major complaint, even with Hmong-speaking farm workers, and definitely the case with Punjabi-speaking farm workers, that, for instance, this USDA grant, that none of the contracted agencies have provided any information in outside of English and Spanish. We've heard that a bit from some of our indigenous language-speaking communities, largely from Guerrero or Oaxaca, but I think there's sort of an ecosystem to at least provide that information. I think that one or two organizations have actually been contracted, so it's actually getting out to there. In Asian languages, nothing is actually going out. It's just whatever's starting to sort of spread. And then a lot of the agencies do not have anyone that could actually speak to actually assist them with that, with those efforts. So I think these are sort of some of the major things that we're hearing. I think we still have like large concerns. We're actually having an opportunity to listen to people in a big way, because so many have approached us to assist them, at least and connect them with resources to try to, for instance, get that grant as they're hearing about it. So, you know, we did a workshop actually yesterday. We had over 175 Punjabi-speaking farm workers traveling from as far as Kern County and Merced County to our Fresno office. We have another one scheduled for this weekend, which we expect to break 500. So there's still a significant number. And I think it's like they feel that they have been woefully reached out to. And so there's an opportunity for us to work together, plan together, strategize together. You know, we want to be partners, but I think these are some of the kind of major things that we're hearing bubble up, and a slight bit of caution too. I know, and I probably would have agreed with Anuvir at an earlier time. I mean, in terms of I think one also has to be very careful a little bit, even in terms of picking ethnic radio stations, for instance, or any ethnic media, because I think it's also important to know what their particular politic may be. And I have definitely seen, in terms of some of the most popular Punjabi radio stations, and there are still exceptions, but they're, whether it be around public health issues or whether it be around just issues related to workers' rights, there has definitely been the polarization that we're seeing at the national scene is very much sort of felt even within ethnic radio in terms of what information they want to share and not share. And so I think, we want to be a partner to make sure to navigate that communities, families, and workers are getting the information they need. But this is just something that we have definitely started noticing, especially which in some ways tails with some of the larger conversations we're hearing around not only the state, but the country. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that background. And then one question that popped into my head just as you were speaking, you mentioned you had a workshop this week and are having one this weekend. Is that on labor rights specifically or a different topic?
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So that one is specifically with regards to, we're adding some labor rights stuff, but to be honest, the focus is actually how to apply for that USDA grant.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I know, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking to expand our partnerships. And I think to the extent we can have further conversations offline about ways to talk to some of your chapters and your members, we would love to do that. We want to try and address the issue of lack of information that is reaching certain populations of farm workers and make sure that everyone is getting that information. We've been following info around the USDA grant generally and just challenges generally that workers have had in terms of accessing information about that. So it's unfortunate to hear that there haven't been materials directly focused on Punjabi workers, but I'm happy to hear that you guys are filling a void. Do any of my colleagues have any other questions or comments?
I just have one question. You mentioned current speaker, this could go to both of you, John, as well. I think I heard a mention of Parkinson's disease. Is there something going on that is of concern with respect to Parkinson's disease among farm workers?
What there is early studies, and they have not drawn a strong necessary causation, but there seems to be correlation around certain pesticide exposures, especially over long term and early onset Parkinson's. And it's actually the children of the farm workers that are oftentimes bringing me these studies too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is Cynthia. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think one of the things that resonates with me from both presentations is the intergenerational approach to dissemination of information. I'd be curious to hear, is that you said a high school program that you all there's like a program that you all facilitate your programming with or through?
So we have
Is that
different
correct?
teams. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so for instance, our because we have such a large high school program throughout the state, oftentimes they are the ones either most likely going to bring their parents to one of our office or to lift up certain issues. So where we end up hearing the most around certain farm worker issues will be, for instance, in communities like the rural areas in Fresno County, or for instance, Delano, like Cesar Chavez, our chapter at Cesar Chavez High School, or our chapter in Mendota or at Kerman High School. So that's sort of how we sometimes most hear information, where it's actually the children who will either bring their parents into our office or start sharing and asking other kids, because oftentimes their parents are most involved in farm work.
Thank you.
Great. And Anu, I see, we lost you briefly, but you're back. Pleased to see you. I don't know if you want to finish your thought that you were sharing with us.
I think Deep summarized it pretty well. I think initially there was a tendency to be more acceptance to receive resources by employers, and that tendency has definitely drifted away, and there is increased like hesitance now in terms of resources provided. So I definitely echo that idea. And then I think that's pretty much it. I think it's, like I said, we are just like scratching the surface. There are lots of other issues and illnesses that farm workers are dealing with. Deep had mentioned increased incidence of Parkinson's disease among those who live near high insecticide use areas. There is a lot of research done by UCLA researchers regarding pesticide use and the correlation to disease, and it's like for 2.5 times more likely, those folks are more likely to develop Parkinson's disease if they live in a highly concentrated area that has high pesticide use. So there are other health implications that farm workers are not aware of. I think educating them is definitely the first thing that we can do. And then secondly, educating them in a language that they comprehend and providing them the resources that tailor to their interest of learning is something we can draw upon from what I found in my study, and hopefully kind of work with them utilizing printed materials, videos, and radio messages moving forward.
Great, thank you. Well, unless anyone else has questions, this concludes this portion of the meeting. Deep, thank you so much. I know you're traveling in an airport, so appreciate you taking the time. And Anu, really appreciate your research and perseverance, given some of the challenges that you mentioned. This has been really insightful for us. And just a couple things for both of you that you may be interested in. One, several of us participate in a monthly call within the administration with CalOSHA and the Labor Commissioner's Office and a variety of other agencies and some federal partners as well. And so we did share this information with some of them, and we'll be kind of reporting back. And we do have a court reporter doing a transcript. So I think this will be really helpful for some of our colleagues, particularly CalOSHA, who is looking to expand developing their materials as well, and making sure it's reaching a larger population of workers. And then additionally, it's still tentative, but we are looking to have our November 15th board meeting in Visalia the day ahead of the Farm Worker Women's Conference there, and focusing on pesticide issues. And that'll probably be in the afternoon. So we'll get you guys more information about that, but maybe of particular interest. But again, just thank you so much for your work, and then also for taking the time to share it with us.
Thank you. And if you could just share those details with me, I will try to do my best to make it to one or more of those meetings, depending on my residency schedule, which is very tight.
Yeah, I imagine you're pretty busy.
Yeah. Please send it, and always great to hear from you, Anuvir. Thank you all for allowing me to share some comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much for calling while traveling. Really appreciate it. Okay, our next agenda item, why don't we actually take a brief 5-minute break, just if people need to get water or whatnot, and then we'll come back here at 3:12, and we'll have our additional agenda item of the compliance manual. So 5-minute break. Here, tell me we're recording.
We're now recording.
Okay. Great. Okay, we are back on the record. Our next agenda item is discussion around the compliance manual. And this is really an opportunity, this was a project that was started a little while ago for a variety of reasons. It's taken a little bit of time, but this was sort of the first substantive step forward. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to review at least some of the initial feedback, as well as discuss some issues. I think just to set the table a little bit, compliance with the board's orders lies with the board, and we delegate it back out to the regions. Our board, at least since the majority of us have been here, with the exception of Member Hall, at least for the board members, board council's a little bit different, have not had a lot of compliance matters before us. And then this year, as you all know, we've had several decisions and administrative orders. And we should be mindful, as we discuss this, to not bring up any pending case matters or case matters that, while maybe not pending now, may come back to us for whatever reason. But and in the background of all of as this time has been going on, staff led by Ed Blanco, and I'm very appreciative of his efforts, as well as regional staff have been, particularly Delia, have been focused on updating this manual. And I, got a copy of it. I accepted the non-substantive edits and then shared a draft back out with you with various questions. I was hoping we can then open up the discussion with the full board here to kind of talk through some issues, and then from there, form a committee, which is how I think manuals were updated in the past. It's been about 31 years since this has been substantively updated. So, not a lot of institutional memory here about how it was done, but hopefully having a combination of board council as well as RD staff who can then go through and kind of work way through the updates. So with that, I want to dive into some questions that I think will be helpful to maybe discuss as a group. One being, the chapter kind of goes through definitions and sort of setting the framework for compliance, and the various roles. And one of the roles that's referred to as this agency compliance officer, as something distinct and separate from the general counsel and from the regional director. And I don't know if anyone else has, or maybe Ed may be our only person. If you could maybe give us some context, what was that role previously?
Yeah.
I think when we were a larger body.
Sure, that was actually a position that I held for quite some time. And the role is basically, and this is again, one in contextually is back in a time where computer resources were not what they are now. So most of everything had to be done by, them sending memos to me. And then the role of the agency compliance officer was to put that translate that into a broader memo to the board. And in line with what the boards, because this is different boards over the years, what those boards were interested in, and presenting the information along the lines that they wanted it. So that would be what that role was, fairly ministerial in one level. On another level, I would also be the conduit of, if the board had direction on a compliance case that in terms of timelines, et cetera, I would be the conduit of that information back to the regional directors, whatever, and any other information they wanted to pass on. For instance, a key issue was the board desired that the regions file the abstract of judgment as soon as the case became final, rather than waiting until there was some issue to have to deal with through court enforcement. And that was something that they asked, that I would have communicated to the regional directors as part of my assignment in that role of agency compliance officer. But also the general counsels at that point, during that same period of time, wanted to make sure that balancing roles and assignments between ULP cases, election cases, and compliance cases, that their staff the staff was being used in dividing up, the time that they had in an appropriate way as that general counsel defined what was appropriate. So that was the other part of my communications with the regions was regarding use of time and resources in compliance versus other things. And that, of course, created some conflict between general counsel and board on occasion during those time periods.
And can I just, I know when you were communicating timeline information down the chain, were you speaking on behalf of the GC or the board?
The board.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Judge.
I guess that would be in a nutshell is what the agency compliance officer's role during those time periods was.
Can I ask a question? But you were a staff of the general counsel side?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess, given that we don't really have someone quite in that role now,
Nope.
I'm trying to understand, I'm still having a little bit of a hard time understanding how it would function while still observing the firewall issue.
What, was it for the purpose of maintaining the firewall, or was it more for like
I think it was for the purpose.
technological?
Yeah, I think I couldn't, they would be communicating to me what the issues were, specific issues that were holding things up.
They be who?
The regional director.
Okay,
I wouldn't be communicating to the board the details about that, but I could, in summary, say that there are issues occurring that's holding this up. That's why you're not getting this along the lines of the timelines you want. Saying that to the board, but not getting into what those issues are, because that would have crossed that line.
Do you think in any way it was because of the way the NLRB is designed? Because there are
Yeah.
compliance officers in the NLRB
Right.
and they do all the compliance.
And they have a whole
Team.
whole team, a
Unit,
whole
yeah.
unit in
Right.
AC that runs that whole thing nationwide. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering to what extent did regulate the manual borrowed from
And they
the
borrowed that too.
framework of the NLRB, thinking it would work here on a micro level, and then maybe didn't work quite as.
Right, they borrowed that, the design of that is also was borrowed from the NLRB in terms of, there being regional compliance officers, and then an agency compliance officer, those concepts, NLRB concepts.
okay. I think understanding that role is helpful. I think going through this and looking at the references to the extent we keep some of these descriptions, thinking through who would undertake that role now. I think in some ways, what has supplanted that role are the regional directors give a monthly compliance report to let the board know what's going on. I think, as you may have seen recently, the board is interested in getting kind of more detail on certain status updates. I think one thing I could see the board doing prospectively would be, currently when issues or when matters are released to compliance, it's a pretty, it's kind of just a paper from the executive secretary saying this matter's been released to compliance. I think either in the order or in the release, I could see the board saying kind of more prescriptively, for lack of a better word, regional director, please report on the status of where each of these remedies are within 30 days or something like that, and every 30 days, which I think happens now with the compliance report, but it's a little bit more based on what the region wants to share, I guess.
No. We based on what was,
Good thing.
it was based on what was done.
True, yes.
It was based on fulfilling the duties.
Yeah, and I'm not, I'm just,
For
I'm
the
not looking at you
record.
for any
For
specific
the
reason.
record. But can I chime in there?
Yes,
And
yes,
I'm not opposed to that. I think, I've been thinking about this since I read your edits and, you know, there's a lot of factors that determine when certain terms can be completed. For example, the reading of the notice,
Mhm.
we like
Yes.
to hold during the peak of the season. So that's not gonna necessarily be within the 30 days that it gets released for compliance. It might be a whole 8 months later. And you know, we wanna read 8 months later if that's when you're gonna have 400 employees versus 100 employees. So we can definitely you provide more detail about the terms.
Mhm.
And then the other one, you know, to keep in mind, like, for example, I just shared about Smith, the order, you know, had to have the notice provided to all new employees for the 12-month period.
Right,
So to me, in my interpretation, you know, I wasn't gonna be able to close it until that end of the 12-month period so that I could ensure compliance with that term. But it doesn't mean that the other ones weren't being worked on. So I was hoping that we were reporting on the other ones in the previous months, but we can continue to do that. But if you want like a cumulative, checklist kind of, these are the ones that have been done, these are to be done. So every month you can see the progress. We can also incorporate that information, I guess. I'm trying to give you just what was done this last month,
yeah.
but it doesn't mean that you remember what was done the previous month, I realize.
Yeah, and that I think is good. Seeing what's been done in the last month is good. I think there have been some instances where the readings, I understand, I think there's other instances where we can't quite see why there's delay. And in some cases we learn later, it's because maybe respondents council is, for lack of a better term, jerking the region around. And so sometimes we learn about it later, but sometimes it's not really clear to us why things are or aren't happening, or more like why they're not happening.
Okay.
And to piggyback off of that, I think what I hope, you know, what we hope we've communicated in orders and decisions, and what I want to reiterate as well, you know, I think compliance is really important. It's what really effectuates the remedy. They've gone and won their case.
Yes.
Now this is actually getting the money in the pocket, or the reading out there, and kind of showing that this worked. To the extent you all need resources, training, additional guidance, whatever, I think let us know what that is so we can help you be more effective with compliance. You know, we're always open to that. And I do think this manual, when done, can hopefully be helpful, particularly as we get new staff or have staff with less experience. They have hopefully more contemporary guidance that can help drive their work.
Mhm.
Additionally, with roles, one thing that I noticed was not in here that I wonder if it could be helpful is, and this is based on my impression, you know, there's a team generally driven by an FE that leads an investigation, is sort of the lead staff member, if you will, on a matter. I know some matters go on for a long period of time, there's turnover and different things, so the team changes. But when it gets to the compliance stage, I think there's a lot of responsibilities dictated by either the compliance officer, the regional director, the GC, or the board, but not really about the case. You know, who's actually running that information on the case. Whether it's the FE or the regional compliance officer. My understanding is the RDs are supervising all that work, but then they're not necessarily like the one to do the actual monitoring. They're helping ensure whichever staff person is responsible is getting that done. And so I think to the extent it's relevant, putting in the manual, if it's the FE that's supposed to be doing certain tasks, or the regional compliance officer is supposed to be doing certain tasks, I think having that, or the attorney, or when the FE should be engaging an attorney, I think that could be helpful to incorporate into the manual. And relatedly, we talked about the agency compliance officer. I do understand each of the regions has a regional compliance officer, and that is a position that's active. Could you help educate me and the rest of the board on what kind of income, what that role does now, and if you think there should be other changes, or I think we don't have a great sense of who that is.
So for Visalia, it's Flavio, right? And he tracks, like he will give me the draft of the compliance report that I send to you. So he fills in, you know, this month, this is what we did. You know, this certain FE has been reaching out to this worker, or we did the reading. What he, you know, he tracks it and he'll put some of that information in, sends it to me. You know, I look through it, I compare it, add, you know, edit it, and then submit it to you. So yeah, so basically he's tracking as soon as they're released for compliance, and then, you know, what are the steps, what needs to be done, and when, like Jessica said, right, like when is peak, sending out that a letter, right, to get all that information from the employer, right, like when is peak, when, and then tracking that, like, okay, July is gonna be peak, so let's, you know, in June, or even sooner, right, May, start reaching out to schedule that. Yeah, so that's the gist of, you know, what he does.
Do they,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead. Go.
Well, it starts, so the compliance officer in the Plymouth region is Maydali, and so as soon as the matter is released to compliance, there's a letter that we use that lays out all of the specific terms of the board's order. And in detail, we tell them, reiterating the board's order, this is what you need to do by when. And then below that paragraph says, please provide me the signed notice within 5 days of this letter, right? Even if we're not gonna go out and read, because we don't know the peak yet, we're giving them deadlines in that letter on which they have to complete certain things. So then the compliance officer is tracking those deadlines on their own. You know, the signed notice has to come back to me in 10 days or 5 days. I have to get information about the peak, how many crews do you have, how many ranches do you have, you know, how many workers will be at peak, how many different locations, how many bulletin boards. So all of that is in a letter. And that letter is the basis for ensuring compliance with all of those terms, so that we're constantly tracking what they've completed and what is left to do. So the compliance officer in the Salinas region will then have all of these cases that are on the compliance report, the board ordered cases, and will be tracking what needs to happen. And if there's a back pay specification that needs to get done or make whole, then they'll be working on that with their supervisor. And then they'll be reaching out to council, for example, on when they're gonna go out and read the notice. So if there's a snag, for example, council has not responded to the regional compliance officer, then the attorney and the field examiner team will be brought in. And if we've learned information that the operation has ceased, for example, then the attorney and the field examiner will be brought in. So if it's all smooth sailing and council's working with the regional compliance officer and we're crossing off all of the things, then it can stay with the regional compliance officer. She's reporting to me and I'm reporting to you. But if we're running into some type of obstacle with correspondence, or you know, the compliance officer thinks, well, they're saying peaks right now and there's 20 workers, but they don't believe that's the truth, we'll go back to the team and the team will then get involved. But for the most part, I wanted it to stay in the purview and the focus of the regional compliance officer so that it does get moved forward.
Okay, that's helpful. Any of my colleagues have questions? Another question I had, I'm just kind of going through my notes from this. In the monitoring section, there was some language that had been recommended to be removed about the worker having a waiver for release of their social security or EDD information. Are we still gathering that info? Is that obsolete?
Yeah, it's obsolete.
Okay. And are we using other resources to try and get that information?
Well, we can still access the resource with the EDD department. And doesn't necessarily require a release from the employee. Most often we have information from records that we obtain that we can use to source from the EDD. And in regards to the Social Security, we haven't used that resource or asked workers to sign a waiver to reach out to that agency.
There was also it's page 6 of the draft manual, discussion about kind of informing the discriminatees of their obligations. And I'm wondering, do we have like a worksheet or anything that we give to workers that kind of says these are all the things you should keep track of when we're interviewing them? So we do.
We don't have a worksheet that we necessarily give them. I think this is where our staff does a really good job at relaying this information about the obligation under the act and letting them know what kind of information we're going to be asking them for. There is a gap in regards to documentation. And we can, strongly advocate that workers document, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a range of people's comfort level with writing things down and then producing it to us. Even, oftentimes workers will tell us that they went to this ranch and they walk onto the ranch, they ask that person there if there's work. They don't necessarily know the name of the ranch. They don't know the name of that foreman. Some feel different levels of comfort in asking the foreman their name. What's the name of this ranch? What's your name? Because they need to document it for us. And so there's a wide range, but our staff know that they need to document as much as they can get from the worker orally over the phone. And so we are working on making it more of a practice that field examiners are being more consistent with that follow-up throughout the course of what could be a back pay period. But we don't give a form to workers to ask them to fill it out.
There is a really old booklet.
Yeah.
We have a few in Salinas. We like them. There's a booklet where you can write down if you're searching for work, you write down your wages, you write down things in this booklet. It's a really great booklet. It's a good tool. It's small, it's pocket size. I would suggest we update that booklet so we have more of those on hand. Because even though most people use their phones and everything, that doesn't mean
write down a booklet.
I have had mixed reviews from FE. Some FEs say they really like the booklet and they get some information. So I think it's useful to have at least an updated booklet that we can give out. At least it's a tool we're providing to workers to try to facilitate this process.
Yeah, it just depends on the worker. I mean,
Oh,
some of them getting information on the phone is difficult, But yeah, so.
Oh, this was one. What is an ISR? I made that up.
It's a memo at the conclusion of an investigation that we're in a team, an investigating team summarizes their investigation and they recommend next steps.
It
So
stands for
investigative
investigative
rules.
summary and report.
Okay.
It contains both a factual summary and a legal analysis.
They used to be called agendas, which I think Ed would probably recognize.
Oh, that word I understand.
Yeah, and I thought agenda was a confusing term
is a
for it, so I
vague term.
renamed it, yes. Agenda was a little too common of a commonly used term, yeah.
And then in terms of the compliance file, are those being kept in the shared drive, an eCore, in a paper file? Where's kind of the master compliance file for a matter, to the extent there is one?
On eCourt, there's the ability to enter when the terms are completed and the date, how many people they read the notice to, for example. So that's where the reporting is being done, tracked. And then in terms of working files, probably the compliance officer, is keeping the the working file in J Drive, which would be like drafts of letters or back pay or make whole specifications in progress, and then the finals are all saved to court.
And then I saw a lot of references to a tickler system. Is that still being used? It looks like it, this was created in 1992 and it looked like I imagine like it was a paper worksheet.
Probably
I
a
saw-
carbon copy.
Yes, I think I saw some examples in the appendices. Is that still being used?
Not in that form.
It's the letter, right, that Jessica, and that initial letter, and we use that to keep track and.
An Outlook.
Yeah, Outlook, we'll get, calendar, things will get calendared.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that there in the manual, there's a lot of appendices, and one that to me seemed kind of related was this form 212, which had like all, you sort of map out all the deadlines for when you needed everything, and I think that needs to be updated because it's not currently very updated. And now with the bond and sort of the changing nature of compliance, I think that whole process probably needs to be reviewed and discussed based on how it works. And then one thing, there was kind of this, to me, it seemed maybe outdated or not very clear, category 1, category 2 cases in the compliance manual, and I couldn't figure out what some of the categories were. So I thought that was something that probably needed updating. Some comments just about kind of how this manual is organized and maybe restructuring it to the extent, you guys use it more on a day-to-day basis, so it needs to work for you. Okay.
I think part of it was that everyone was trying to commit to the old version and edit that rather than
Throw it out or
let's create
rebuild it.
something new.
Yeah.
So to the extent that the committee wants to think about whether that's the better option or whether it's better to go forward with something new that's organized in a different, more logical way.
Yeah.
It's a consideration.
What was the other thing I was gonna suggest here or had a question about? Oh, I know. One of my other questions that I've heard that I'm just wondering if you can help educate us on is that because this is so outdated, a lot of staff actually now rely on the NLRB compliance manual, which is set up very differently. And I didn't know if there were specific things that staff found helpful in the NLRB compliance manual. If that's even correct summary.
I'm trying to think of when it's come up that.
I've heard-
An example, yeah.
I've raised before that when there's a allegation of financial distress or bankruptcy or that kind of thing, the NLRB has a nice questionnaire, which we've talked about at one of these meetings in the past. And we all looked at that form. That's a form from the NLRB we use. I like using it. It's helpful. I don't think staff, I haven't done it full, but I don't think staff overly relies on the NLRB's manual. I do believe that there are changes in law that we do look to the NLRB for, like the inclusion of consequential damages, which the NLRB has done more recently, and there's some, other changes in law that are helpful, and our manual's outdated for those kinds of things. But I don't think that staff is looking to the NLRB's manual for process and procedure and how we do things. And we do use the NLRB's system for interest and tax liability.
So are we seeing a lot, I don't know if there's a way to characterize, in various compliance cases, are we seeing a lot of insolvency, success, change of the things that you're talking about? Looking to the NLRB checklist, are we seeing a lot of those instances arise?
I can answer for the last, 2 years, I think now that I've been the regional director. We haven't had, we've been advised that a operation has closed before the final board order. And in that case, the monetary amount that was owed to one worker was paid. And so another matter that we've seen is similar in that the operation ceased before the board order was issued. And we're still working on that case. But other than that, the cases in the Salinas region, the one that was closed that Francesca started when she was the RD.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of cases, but sometimes we have allegations that I am financially strapped. I can't pay these workers. We're considering going out of business. Then it's nice for the region to be able to say, well, there's this nice form that you can do. You can tell us all about your finances. And we can decide whether like something's warranted, right? Some change in the remedy is warranted. And usually upon that, people are like, no, thank you. I'll pay the money. That's generally what we've seen. And so it's a nice tool. But if there was a case where an employer was actually, winding down their operations, it would be nice to say that here's this form, we could assess all the things that had to be assessed. And for Mayor Raspberries, for example, assess those different aspects of their operation and decide, if a informal resolution would be best for the worker. Or a formal resolution with the board.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think I have anything else. I'm sure more stuff will come up. I think the other thing, just to reiterate, is we need to incorporate the bond, and I think look at the overall structure, and then to the extent more up-to-date case references are applicable, make sure those are incorporated in here. Anything else from my colleagues? Ed, you're a subject matter expert. Anything else you think we should be thinking about, or?
Yeah, I think, when you guys were talking about this particular thing, and that would be how can, and this gets to the overall thing about e-courts, how can e-courts be a better tool for following, tracking cases on the regional level as a tool for the regional directors and staff to put in all these dates and stuff and have that be a way to remind them, that it can, like my phone reminds me, I get, if I set up an appointment, it reminds me that I've set that up and tells me, I got this coming up. So how can e-courts be used like that for this system? Overall, how can e-courts can actually maybe play a role with respect to agency compliance officer might be more e-courts, in terms of, advising you what's going on in the regions, how can that be beefed up so that it is more supportive of you getting information that you want by clicking on the case, right? And it's there as to here are all the timelines the region has set up, and to the extent, again, this is you have to protect the firewall in there, because I think they do report things more specifically, on one level about what the issues are, but to the extent, can it be tailored so that you guys get, hey, there's something going on, but without the details of what that's going on and why there's some kind of issue or delay that may ultimately get to you, as an enforcement action that you have to approve, et cetera. So I think that's one thing there. Let's see. And I also think, and I think I mentioned this to you, Victoria, in terms of, and I think it came up today in the conversation we had here, and that is this issue of cultural competency. When we're dealing more particularly because we're now dealing with farm workers who, indigenous farm workers, Hmong farm workers, Punjabi farm workers, what is the best approach to gather information from them? How can we help them help themselves and help us with respect to the information we need from them in order to move forward on a variety of issues that may crop up in a compliance case, where they might be a key font of knowledge, to resolve some issue that's going on. So training around those issues, I think, is an important thing that staff should be getting. And that should be incorporated into some way into this first chapter, this issue of cultural competency so, and not just for our own consumption, but for the fact that this is going to be a public document. I think it's important for the public to understand that we understand that this is an issue and that we're addressing it. So along those lines as well.
Yeah, just general comment. I think streamlining as much as possible, and I'm glad that we had a conversation about kind of the delegation of duties. And I think the regional compliance officer, I think it's sufficiently detailed, the responsibilities in the manual. I was having a little bit of difficulty with the agency compliance officer and the distinction. And so today's conversation was very helpful. And yeah, just noting and uplifting Ed's point about the cultural competency. And I really do think that the regional staff and the general counsel programs really attune to those kinds of issues. And one of the things that I noted and one of the suggested edits in terms of how to maintain contact with the discriminantees was different avenues for contact, and just being sensitive to while there, it's a how-to more instructional manual, there might be some sensitivities to folks being able to provide their home address information. And I know there's ways to navigate and attain that information, but being sensitive to those kinds of issues, or folks' willingness to provide phone numbers, et cetera. And I know that they're listed as examples, but it's to the point of understanding that there's an element of distrust, and or just because of the nature and composition of the workforce, that some of those avenues may be better to use than others. But generally speaking, I think, also appreciate the clarification on the use of social security numbers and or EDD information. So yeah, very, very great conversation.
And just really want to reiterate, you guys have really complicated jobs and a lot on your plate, and just appreciate all your work. And I know updating a 31-year-old manual or however this is not the easiest thing to do, but I do think it's helpful to just make sure we have consistency in our work, and hopefully make it's a lot of work at the front end, but my hope is it can just make work for staff and managers and supervisors easier on the back end, and hopefully lead to better results. So just really appreciate your time, and also all of you taking the time to come here today. It's always nice to see you guys in person when we can. So really appreciate that. Any other comments or questions on the compliance manual?
I would just want to thank Cynthia specifically for the comment. I think our staff really, was not written in here. What they've become highly trained and skilled at doing is really meeting workers where they're at, and really, really, creating miracles, finding people, answering all the questions, spending all the time they need to feel comfortable enough to then trust us to then provide very personal information. And that's not written in here, and I'm not sure how we provide best tips and get that, that great goal they have of what they do every day. But I think it's useful, and I think it's worth noting. So thank you for that comment. And I just wanted to thank you, Victoria and Ed, for all of your comments on here. They're very helpful. And I think that going forward, the committee is going to have some good information on direction with this conversation and with these comments. So thank you guys.
I would just add, I just, from the board side, that we appreciate you guys are on the front line. You're engaged with our client community and the employer all you're the people doing all the frontline work, and we really appreciate it.
Yay, regional staff.
Yes.
Our team.
Yes.
You guys
Absolutely.
are great. Yes.
Barry, did you have any comments?
No.
Oh, you're on mute.
No,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. And I'll be following up with our RD staff, about getting kind of an initial meeting together in the next couple of weeks. And thinking through how we want to project manage this, that's a whole other project in and of itself. Okay, the next, item on the agenda, we do have, public comment. Do we have anyone wishing to make public comment?
No one's indicated a wish to do that.
Okay, well, with that, we will now adjourn our meeting. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.